For many of the city's nearly 1 million public school students, today is the first day of school. As we speak, students are mourning the end of summer, teachers are getting to know their new classes, and Mayor Bill de Blasio is beginning his second full school year in charge of the nation's largest education system. With new test scores recently arrived, continuing controversy over charter schools, and a mere 12-month lease on mayoral control, this could be a critical year for the mayor, his chancellor Carmen Farina, and the students they serve. Here to discuss what's at stake this year are Tanika Boyd, Director of Organizing at Students First. Hi, Tanika.
Hi.
Pedro Noguera, the Peter L. Agnew Professor of Education at New York University. Welcome, Professor.
Thanks, Jared.
And Ruth Ford, a freelance education reporter for City Limits. Ruth, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
So today is the first day of school. I dropped my sixth grader off at his new middle school. I'm feeling a mix of excitement, worry, fear. When you think of the system as a whole, Tanika, what are you feeling this year?
Well, I also dropped my fourth grader off today at school before I came over today. And I am somewhat optimistic for her in her future, but I continue to be concerned about the 1.1 million students, many of those students who are zoned to failing schools. So I think a mix of optimism and a mix of concern.
What are you looking for this year from the mayor and the chancellor that you haven't seen so far?
I'm looking for a bold new plan of action, some innovation, a way to figure out how we make sure that kids, especially those who are marginalized, low-income students, students of color, who are marginalized and really pushed into failing schools, I'm looking for a bold plan of action to figure out what we can do better to help serve those kids.
Professor, do you think we're going to see such a plan? And if we did, what should be in it? That's the real question, right?
Well, I would be surprised if we do, actually, now. I thought if we were going to see a plan, we'd have seen it already. I don't think this is an administration that leads with plans or with vision. They lead through initiatives. The big initiative is pre-K. I want to give them a lot of credit. We have more kids. Every child that needs to be or wants to be can be in pre-K right now in New York City. That's a huge accomplishment. It's not all high quality because there are a lot of teachers that are not trained. There's a lot of curriculum not in place, but it's a huge step in the right direction. Problem is, and I agree with Tanika, we're not seeing a lot of bold ideas about what to do about the large number of failing schools. I would say for most middle-class parents like yourself and Tanika, you're probably fine. Your schools your kids are in are great. Some of the best public schools in America are right here in New York City. However, for poor kids, that's not the case, and that is a huge issue facing the mayor.
If we were to hear about bold ideas, what are some of them that you would like to see the mayor put on the table if that were the kind of mayor he is?
Well, the two big issues facing New York City in education are racial segregation and poverty. And what the mayor's got to do is offer high-quality alternatives and options with respect to schools in poor neighborhoods. We're not doing that right now. If you look at some of the schools, the struggling schools, a school like DeWitt Clinton High School, a school like Boys and Girls here in Brooklyn, they're serving very high numbers of impoverished kids. They're under-resourced, and they're not offering much. You'll never attract middle-class parents into those schools unless you begin to offer a well-rounded, high-quality education.
Ruth, let's bring you in. Speaking of middle-class parents, the Governor Cuomo, kind of threw an interesting wrench into the education reform discussion this week, or last week, I should say, in relation to Common Core, something we've talked about a lot in these debates recently. What do you think is the short-term impact of what the governor called for? Why don't you explain what he called for and tell us what you think the impact was?
So what the governor said, as I'm sure a lot of folks know, is that he wants to convene a task force or a panel to look again at Common Core curriculum. And he did this last year, and what was notable about that panel, about that task force last year, is it didn't touch the subject of teacher evaluations. And I think that that's where the sticking point is really coming in. I think a lot of parents are concerned about how their children did on the more rigorous state tests in 2004. 1 in 5 across the state have opted out, far fewer in New York City, though the opt-out movement is gaining traction. And I think that Cuomo really politically is responding to that and saying, okay, we're going to look again at the Common Core, which I think personally, I think we have to move forward with what we have. I don't think it's time now for a review. The Common Core was adopted in 2010. We've been arguing about the edges of it since 2010. You're trying to bring teachers up to speed. You're trying to bring students up to speed. We have to go with what we have. And this constant, we're going to look at it then, I think sends the wrong message to teachers. I think it sends the wrong message to parents. I think we have to work go forward now as a team on Common Core.
Does anybody have an idea of why the opt-out rate and the opt-out story was so much less a story here in the city? What's the going theory on that?
I don't think it's gaining a lot of traction, especially in low-income communities and communities of color where we organize primarily. So you're talking in East New York, Brownsville, South Jamaica, Queens. A lot of the parents are interested in knowing how their students did. I think they're also interested in figuring out how we improve assessments, right? And so I don't think they see opting out as a way to hold a system accountable and to see how their kids are doing. Now, at my daughter's school, PS 321, in Park Slope, which is not too far from here, there is a growing sentiment around opt-out. But those are parents, many of those parents are parents of means, and not to dismiss those parents because many of them are concerned parents, but they're also the latte drinking, kale chip eating, Obama tote bag wearing parents who are more concerned with the vacation time and making sure their kids have more vacation time than preparing for the test. So I think it's somewhat of a disconnect, and what we saw when we really reviewed who opted out, it was largely folks in middle-class communities, largely folks in white communities, and largely folks who were outside of the city. So I think it's not really penetrating in the city as much as folks who are anti-testing would have liked.
Professor, I saw you smirking when Ruth mentioned a task force. Maybe that's because you've been on some of them. But
Yeah,
what do you think is behind what the governor did, and what do you think comes out of it in terms of impact on the city students?
Well, what's not there is an admission that he's the one who screwed it up. He's the one who pushed New York to adopt the standards. And here's what we did. We adopted the assessments before we did the work of preparing teachers and providing curriculum. So if you compare New York to states that haven't had a big opt-out, like California, they spent years getting schools ready before they did the assessments. We did the opposite. We started with the assessments, and then we saw these high rates of failure, which resulted in many parents objecting. I think the opt-out movement will grow as more and more parents realize how much instruction time is taken away for test preparation and for assessment. The whole what we've been doing is so wrong. We've been focused on assessing kids, not focused on how to provide high-quality instruction to kids. That's what we should be doing. And unfortunately, neither the mayor nor the governor is making that the priority.
And you could almost make a parallel argument about teachers, right? The Common Core features and how we evaluate teachers, that's been very fluid as well. And there's a question of assessing versus training too.
Right, and I just want to jump in for a second because I feel like there actually has been, from what I've been reading and people I've been talking to, I think there has been an effort to kind of structure teaching children how to think. I mean, that's what the new tests are. It's how do children think, not regurgitating facts. They are much harder because they have to be able to process the information, and the answer is no longer in the text. That's the shorthand of it. You have to be able to analyze and then explain it. The math problems aren't straight addition, straight subtraction. They are word math problems. I mean, this is a whole new scaffolding. The DOE is getting away from the word scaffolding, but the fact of the matter is a whole new rubric is happening now to prepare the kids not just for these tests, but for this way to think. And at the same time, the DOE has to bring those teachers who need it, and there are many teachers who need it, up to par to be able to teach these new standards. And the teacher evaluation is a very, very fluid issue. The UFT has been fighting about how much weight test scores are given to their to their overall rating. The governor wants 50% of their evaluation to be based on student test scores. And I mean, I don't know if you can do an actual one-to-one correlation, but you do need to see measures of student progress and look at how the teacher is performing in the classroom. We're also dealing with, and we're a little bit talking about schools and segregation issues like that. I think that you can't just walk into a class and see an even mix of all the races and say, boom, I know this is going to be a working classroom. I think what you need to look at, how many children are English language learners? Well,
that's the point. I think our conversation about schools is about the whole system, but I think some parents, as you said, their schools are fine, they don't see the problem, so we have this inequity kind of built into it. The mayor, his program to deal with that, or that he said will deal with that, is Renewal Schools. Seems like a good thing to do. What do you think of that approach?
I think it's high on rhetoric, very low on results. We're coming up on a year since the mayor has proposed this plan. There are some schools that they're going to stay open until 6 p.m. There will only be 1 hour of instruction after the mayor cut a sweetheart deal with the teachers union that reduced class time by 37.5 minutes. I'm trying to figure out what they're going to do with the rest of that time if schools are staying open to 6 p.m. He's also proposed washers and dryers and glasses. I don't think we're going to washer and dryer our way out of this problem. We have kids who walk into classrooms every day. Poverty is not a learning disability, but they're impoverished. I was impoverished when I was going to school. And they need to be met every single day with a high-quality teacher and a system that has a plan to really address their very specific needs each and every day. And I don't think the renewal plan does that.
So we're a year into that. We're 18 months into de Blasio's oversight of the entire school system. And I guess it raises the political question, right, of, when is it fair to look at his performance versus Mayor Bloomberg? I mean, Bloomberg reorganized the school system 3 times. The tests went up and then went down when they recalibrated them. How do you think we fairly assess how this mayor has done so far compared to his predecessor, who did make education a signature issue?
No, he did. And I think, to Bloomberg's credit, he never dropped the ball. He always stayed focused on education. However, he left a large number, hundreds of struggling schools for de Blasio to address. So that part of the Bloomberg legacy is never fully laid out there, that he left a mess for de Blasio. Now, de Blasio's job is to address it, and he has not laid out a vision. I don't have a problem with the Renewal Schools as a strategy. What I don't see is an effective implementation plan to provide support to the schools. He needs that if he wants mayoral control. He got a 1-year, reprieve from the legislature. That was a slap in the face. But he has not made an effective case for why he deserves control of the schools and what he will do differently. And I think that is something he's going to need to do very soon.
Do we think that charter schools have to be part of that case? I mean, making peace with that movement?
Can I say something about charter schools? Because I was a SUNY trustee that helped authorize several of the charter schools in the city. There's not a single charter school in the city that has taken over a struggling public school. I don't see any charter schools signing up saying, we'll do it. We'll do a better job at boys and girls. We'll do a better job with the same kids. Mm-hmm. I think there's a role for charters. We need to stop fighting about their existence, but we need to make sure that where we have charter schools is in these high-need communities. And unless they want to take that on, and unless they want to be accountable for how they use funds and how they serve children and teachers, then I think charters are being given a pass, a political pass, and lack the accountability they need in a public system.
That was supposed to be part of the idea with charters, right? They were supposed to be kind of a laboratory for ideas, and then if it worked there, we would take it and use it elsewhere. They weren't supposed to be this rival system, right? And how did we get to where we are now?
Well, I think charter schools, it's not rocket science, right? When you think about some of the very high-performing CMOs in our system, what you're seeing is that a lot of these kids are spending 90 minutes a day in math. A lot of these kids are spending 90 minutes a day in reading. A lot of these kids are going to school an hour before I send my daughter to school, and they're staying an hour after I go to pick my daughter up. So it's really not rocket science. Why can't we replicate that in our district public school system? I think if you really go behind the curtain, what you'll see is that there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of status quo, and there's a reason that's preventing our district system from mimicking the innovative ideas that's happening in our charter public school system.
I just want to jump in for a second.
Sure.
Charter schools do nowhere near, and I have no beef, absolutely none, with the charter schools or the idea of charter schools, and I think competition is a good idea. Harbor Heights, a middle school up in Washington Heights, 94% English language learners. So the dial never moves on the ELA, statewide test or the math test. When you have students, when you have a higher percentage of students who are English language learners, when you have a higher immigrant population, when you have kids with IEPs, individualized education plans, charter schools, they may do a lot right. And I don't know if I agree about, like an hour earlier, okay, maybe, but okay, charter schools are doing great, but they are not handling, and this is not to excuse the New York City DOE, they are nowhere near handling the kids who have special needs, and I'm saying that in the broadest sense of the word. Charter schools cherry pick. And until they stop cherry picking, then we will really know whether charter schools are as successful as everyone says
Well,
they
charter
are.
schools don't cherry pick, but what I will say is that a lot of charter schools, that sounds like you're advocating to expand charter schools, because I think if we can increase the number of charters we have in the city, right, we all know the breakdown, only 5% of New York City public school students actually access charter schools. 95% of our kids are zoned to failing schools, especially at the elementary school level. 95% go to New York City public schools. Many of them are zoned to failing schools. I think if we expand the choice and the options for a lot of our parents, especially some of those high-performing CMOs, not all charters are great charters, but if we expand those who are taking kids from low-income communities, ELL, and special needs students, and we replicate that across the city, I think we'll see an increase in numbers. And she sounds like she's advocating for more charters.
Well,
I'm not advocating for more charters. I'm just saying if there were more charters and we saw an equal distribution of what kids are facing going into the classroom, then I think we would have a more accurate display of what's actually happening and the successes in charter schools.
Professor, you're headed out to LA soon to talk about education there, presumably. What do you think is the lesson, very quick wrap up, that you take from having watched education reform here in New York?
You know, what's going on in the United States is a war over the future of public education. The movement to privatize and I think dismantle public education is strong. We see it's taken off in New Orleans, it's taken off in DC, Philadelphia. Many people thought Mayor de Blasio would be the champion of a revived system of public education. He hasn't stepped up to that role yet. My hope is that he will. He has 2 more years to go, but he needs to understand he's in a war and that he's already getting his butt kicked. So now fight back. Fight back with strong, smart, innovative policies that revive our belief that public education can, in fact, serve all children well in New York City.
Well, thank you all so much. Perhaps we can reconvene at the end of the year and see how the war and the school year has gone for all our students, including our mayor.